Good morning, rise and shine to the morning momentum, your daily dose of a comprehensive rundown of the top stories making the headline. Welcome to the broadcast. Today being the 23rd of May 2024, use the hashtag The Morning Momentum at Younib Media TV at Alfonsoh Albakwekwe. My name is Alfonsoh. Let's take a look at the top stories making the headlines on the papers this morning. And we start with the Standard newspaper. The elephant in the room, black market to thrive as Ruto tax plan suffers blow. Kenyans are bracing for tax increases as the William Ruto government seeks to bridge its budget deficit. However, experts warn the more levies government introduces, the more evaders will rise, denying KRA taxes even as petitioners move to court seeking to block MPs from passing the finance bill. That story is augmented for you on page 4 and page 5 of the Standard this morning. Also on the Standard, date with Biden finally here. Of course, yesterday the president met the U.S. President Joe Biden, and Kenyans are waiting for goodies that are going to come out of that state visit to the U.S. Also on page 20, hustler defenders have turned into Gachagwa's critiques. We'll take a look at that in a short while. On page 2, thousands still out of school. At least 2,155 schools damaged by floods failed to reopen for second term on May 13th. There's uncertainty as to when the learners will resume education. The worst affected schools are in Kisumu, Tana River, and Homa Bay counties, with government mulling alternative places for learning. That story is beefed up for you on page 2 of the Standard this morning. On page 6, government in a new plan to privatize more than 200 parastatals. A policy by the National Treasury explains that the law will be amended to convert all commercial agencies into limited private companies so that they can compete with the private businesses for opportunities in government and public service. On the international news, European trio give nod to a Palestinian state. We'll take a look at that on page 25 of the Standard this morning. Let's move on and take a look at page 2. Several schools in Coast, Western, and Nyanza regions still closed due to floods aftermath. Now, education calendar ticking even as thousands of learners miss learning. Classrooms damaged, schools submerged even as families are displaced. That's a top story making the headlines on page 2. On page 3, man wants breakup disputes heard as one. Petitioner asks High Court to pre-order divorce, children, and property laws harmonized. Kimathi Malkio says marriage dissolution expensive and emotionally draining. You want to catch up with more of that on page 3 of the Standard this morning. On page 4, black market boom expected as traders evade higher Ruto taxes. Experts warn increased taxes on money transfers will push away taxpayers. Bankers say proposed levies would put more financial burden on customers. In numbers, 20%, Finance Bill 2024 seeks to increase excise duty on financial services from 15% to 20%. Get this, the bill also proposes excise duty of 20% on financial services. 39.2 shillings is the amount if a bank charges a customer 100 for money transfer. The bill proposes that additional 39.2 shillings, bankers say. So you want to catch up with that on page 4 of the Standard this morning. On page 5, Duo want court to stop finance bill debate. They say MPs should proceed and pass tax proposals. Kenyans would be affected. They say bill has been prematurely introduced, lacks approved fiscal framework. Now, some of the Omtatah and Matindi questions Of course, we understand they moved to court to stop the parliament from passing the finance bill. So here are some of the questions. Does the annual budget contain both estimates of revenue and expenditure as required under Article 220 of the Constitution? Also, whether the Appropriations Act of 2024 must contain the approved budget estimates of revenue and expenditure submitted to the National Assembly under Article 221, Section 1 to 3 of the Constitution. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 5. Let's take a look at page 6. Fresh plan to privatize 200 state agencies. Now, if a new bill is passed, the government entities will become limited private companies. Last year, President Ruto said the government would privatize 35 state companies. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. It's a flash sale. 200 state-owned companies for the government want to transform into limited private companies. That is a top story making the headlines on page 6 of the Standard this morning. Taking a look at page 8, Ruto said to meet Biden as Coca-Cola commits 23 billion shillings investment. The president meets Congress leadership ahead of the visit to the White House. CDC and KEMRI signed deal on research and the Kenya National Public Health Institute. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Of course, Kenyans are anticipating the goodies the president is going to come back with from the state visit to the U.S. Let's take a look at page 10. Fierce defenders of DP Ruto now pushing anti-Gachagua crusade. Those who hit at Uhuru over then DP Ruto are now undermining Gachagua. Mount Kenya leaders clash over who should be Ruto's running mate in 2027. That is a top story on national news, page 10 of the Standard this morning. Now, let's move on and take a look at page 14. 3 robbers shot dead after dramatic chase and items recovered. Thieves on motorcycle were accosting pedestrians when undercover police officers caught up with them. Police recover a pistol, mobile phones, student books, National and University of Nairobi identity cards. That is a top story making the headlines on page 14. Of course, 30,000 shillings is the value of a laptop belonging to Benson Masanga that had been stolen by thugs in Nairobi, according to the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 15. Land PS Korir risk jail term over court's 2.2 million shillings award to school. PS accused of disobeying a court order in matter involving Freehold Primary School. The government allegedly encroached on school's land in 1995. If you want to catch up with that story on page 15 of the Standard this morning. Let's now divert and take a look at the expert opinion. Now, is this why corruption is rife in our deeply religious nation? Now, last week, the KCCB, through the Department of Justice and Peace, the Interreligious Dialogue of Kenya, and the Loyola Center for Media and Communications convened a conference titled Faith Practice in Breaking Chains of Corruption. The event aimed to explore the intersection between faith practice and government responsiveness in service delivery. The conference thesis was an examination on why mega corruption thrives in a country where the majority profess deep religious faith, resulting in the government's limited service delivery. That story is beefed up for you on page 16. On page 17, do you support president's hiring of expensive jet? Do you support president's hiring of expensive jet? Now, Vincent Musili, economist, says Ruto is entitled to secure and dignified trip. On the contrary, Thuku Wakiarie, chairman of Kenya Central Students Association, says no such wasteful spending is unacceptable. Sources say that it was 160 million for every hour. Let's move on and take a look at page 18. President Raisi leaves a legacy of service and love for humankind. The multifaceted personality of Ayatollah Dr. Ibrahim Raisi, the former president of Iran, encompasses a legacy of service, devotion, and leadership that profoundly impacted Iran and the wider world. his tragic martyrdom alongside esteemed figures like the late Foreign Affairs Minister Dr. Hossein Amir and Ayatollah Mohammed Ali Hashem and Dr. Malek Ramati during a significant business trip following the inauguration of a key water dam sent shockwaves throughout Iran and the global community. You want to take a look at that story on page 18. Also, in the spirit of Laudato Si, environment, play your role in slowing down climate change. Please plant trees during this rainy season. You want to catch up with that on page 19. Now let's shift gears and take a look at business news on the Standard this morning. KCB defies expectations to post 16.4 billion shillings net profit in the first quarter. Lender beats rival Equity Group to return to the top of most profitable banks in the first quarter. Interest income rose 41% to 31 billion shillings as the loan book crossed 1 trillion shillings for the first time. That is a top story making the headlines on page 20. In matters infrastructure, Kenya Power loses 328 million shillings to vandals once copper export ban. Now, Kenya Power has lost 78 transformers worth 78 million shillings in the last 5 months, translating into huge replacement costs. Between 2022 and 2023, the power distributing company said it lost 220 million shillings to vandals, with Kenya Power Chief Executive Joseph Siror calling for enhanced collaboration with stakeholders in the scrap metal industry. On matters financing, UN agency firm to host credit rating forum in Nairobi. The United Nations Development Programme Africa, UNDP, will next week host a high-level panel discussion on a credit rating in partnership with Africatalist, themed developing credit rating solutions for Africa's financial needs. The event will feature in-person sessions and virtual participation on the sidelines of the 59th annual meeting of the African Development Bank in Nairobi. Now let's move on swiftly and take a look at other stories on the Standard this morning, and that leads us to the international scene. Now, who are the main figures in South Africa's race for the top job? Under Ramaphosa's watch, unemployment has reached an almost record high. This is expected to be the ANC's worst election result ever. You want to catch up with that story on page 24. In Europe, medics shun UK over visa regulations. The number of migrants applying to work in the health and social care in Britain has plummeted since visa regulations were tightened, the government said yesterday. The fall of more than 75% for the first 4 months of this year comes despite the sector struggling to fill tens of thousands of posts, in part because of tougher immigration rules post-Brexit. You want to catch up with that also on page 24. In Slovakia, Slovak Prime Minister stable week after assassination bid. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico was in a stable but serious condition, his deputy said yesterday. This comes a week after he was shot 4 times in an assassination attempt that shook the deeply polarized country. That story is beefed up for you on page 24. On page 25, diplomacy. Israel angry as European trial recognizes Palestine. Israel reacted with fury after 3 European countries said yesterday they would recognize a Palestinian state more than 7 months into the devastating Gaza war. Ireland, Norway, and Spain said they would formally recognize the state of Palestine on May 28th, drawing praise from many countries in the Arab and Muslim world. That is a top story making the headlines on page 25. Now, in Thailand, 20 in hospital after turbulent Singapore Airlines flight. 20 people were in intensive care in Bangkok hospitals on Wednesday after a terrifying high-altitude plunge on a flight from London, during which an elderly passenger died and more than 100 were injured. That's a top story you want to catch up with on page 24. Now, with that story, we'll take a look at now the sports news inside the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at the top story of sports news. Now, Swiatek eyes place among greats. Poland tennis star aims to bag her fourth French Open crown. Iga is a strong favorite after dominating on clay again this season. Now, in matters basketball, we take a look at NBA. Celtics grind to overtime win in Eastern Finals. The Boston Celtics needed a late rally to force overtime against the Indiana Pacers before emerging with 133-128 win in Game 1 of Eastern Conference Finals yesterday. Moving on to page 38, why Paralympics should put disability back on global agenda. IPC chief persons feels the games will have a big impact on how people with disability are perceived. The games will follow the Olympics and open in 100 days' time on August 28th. That is a top story making the headlines on page 38. Let's take a look at the Olympics. Olympic torch ascends Cannes red carpet. French athletes carried the Olympic torch up the red carpet at the Cannes Film Festival on Tuesday as it makes its way to the capital for the Summer Olympics. On page 39, Ronaldo poised for Euro record as Portugal named team for tournament. The five-time Ballon d'Or winner will be appearing in his 11th major international tournament, Germany's cruise to retire from football after Euro 2024. Also outgoing Gor Mahia boss McKinstry named Gambia coach. Jonathan McKinstry has been named new head coach of the Gambia football team on a 2-year contract, with one of his goals to secure the team's place at the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations. Let's take a look at the EPL. Pep cast doubt over Manchester City future. Pep Guardiola cast doubt over his long-term future at Manchester City on Sunday after winning a historic fourth straight Premier League title, admitting it is difficult to find motivation after so much sustained success. Let's take a look at the cover page. Who could be the next manager at Stamford Bridge? Okay, Pochettino left the club by mutual consent on Tuesday after one season at Stamford Bridge. Company, Amorim, and McKenna have been linked with the role. That is a top story making the headline on the cover page. That's all about Chelsea. Now, with that story, we take a quick break right here. On the Morning Momentum, we are coming back with the top stories making the headlines on the Daily Nation. Don't go away. See you on the other side of this broadcast. Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you are just joining us, you are rolling with the host with the most. Alfonsoh is my name. Use the hashtag The Morning Momentum at Younib Media TV at Alfonsoh Albakwekwe. Remember to follow us across all our social media platforms. Younib Media TV on Facebook and Younib_TV on Instagram. You can as well follow me on my personal handles at Alfonsoh Albakwekwe on Facebook and at _Albakwekwe on Instagram. Let's take a look at the top stories on the Daily Nation this morning. Omtatah moves to block finance bill. Now, opposition to the proposed levies grows amid shrinking incomes. Busia Senator Okia Omtatah wants the High Court to stop public participation on the proposed taxation measures because, contrary to procedure, the National Assembly has prioritized the Finance Bill 2024 before considering and approving the Appropriations Act 2024. That story is beefed up for you on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 10, President Ruto arrives in Washington for second phase of state visit. President William Ruto and First Lady Rachel Ruto arrived at the Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, Washington, D.C. yesterday in America. They were received by U.S. First Lady Jill Biden, and this is the second phase of the president's U.S. visit after Atlanta, where he pitched camp for 2 days, marketing Kenya as a top investment destination in Africa and sealing trade deals. Let's take a look at page 4, why Gachagua is courting Uhuru. The deputy president has once more reached out to retired President Uhuru Kenyatta in his efforts to unite the Mount Kenya region and consolidate his support base amid sustained criticism from a section of local leaders. On page 2, UN wrangles, VC Kiama sent on leave again. The University of Nairobi Council has sent Vice Chancellor Stephen Kiama on leave yet again and directed Professor Ayub Njoroge to continue serving in acting capacity. On page 22, dying coast as Cyclone Lely causes havoc. The cyclone, which had grown from a tropical storm on Tuesday evening, caused strong winds, rains, and large waves in the Indian Ocean yesterday. Let's take a look at page 2 of the Daily Nation this morning. UN wrangles deepen as Kiama sent on leave again. Council says earlier decision to send VC on leave still in force. Vice Chancellor says he is still in office and no one can force him to take leave. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 3 of the Daily Nation this morning, Kagombe, rabble-rousing MP in eye of the storm over shooting. MP has distanced himself from the shooting incidents and blamed political rivals for the chaos on Friday. Lawmaker has been involved in a number of altercations, including with police at Kiambu County function. That is a top story making the headlines on page 3. Let's take a look at page 4. Shunned in Kenya Kwanza. Gachagua now quotes Uhuru. Mr. Gachagua has been facing a revolt instigated by some Mount Kenya leaders who have allied themselves with Kiharu MP Ndindi Nyoro. DP has struck a conciliatory tone, welcoming Mount Kenya leaders who are in the opposition to work with him for the unity of the region. Let's move on and take a look at page 6. State pays fertilizer suppliers 3 billion shillings to end biting shortage. Linturi said that the shortage was occasioned by a lack of funds, resulting in non-payment of the suppliers. Country has been faced with a shortage of top-dressing fertilizer. That's the top story making the headlines on page 6. On page 7, Omtatah moves to block MPs from considering finance bill. Petitioners ask court to suspend ongoing public participation exercise to avoid the passage of an illegal law. Busia Senator claims Parliament must follow procedure by first approving Appropriations Act 2024. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 8. NEMA targets to collect 50 billion shillings through proposed eco levy. Funds collected will be used to set up waste management infrastructure. Environmental Agency's boss explains that the levy will be borne by hands and not importers. That is a top story making the headlines on page 8 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on and take a look at page 10. Kenya, US in new partnership to support STEM education. USAID also announced $32 million, that is a total of 4.192 billion Kenya shillings investment in Kenya's education system. Arrangement aims to drive innovation, research, and good job growth in STEM-related fields in Kenya and globally. All right, let's move on and take a look at page 12. Giant leap to save mankind tree by tree. Conservation, a noble effort to combat climate change, attain food security, and meet development goals. Various religious and non-governmental organizations have joined hands in an environmental preservation initiative. That is a top story making the headlines on page 12. People are being encouraged to plant trees, and so are we. We are also encouraging you to plant as many trees as you can. Let us all fight the climate change. Now, let's move on and take a look at the expert opinion on the Daily Nation this morning. Asset finance, fintechs are bridging the inclusion gap. These companies thus simply bridge the gap between people and access to flexible financing through financial inclusion and accessibility. On page 17, Kenya's students have a good nose. The prestige and value of having a basket full of degrees like former Zimbabwe strongman Robert Mugabe has diminished. You want to catch up with that story on page 17. Now, the letter of the day, claim of low tax to GDP ratio misleading. The government's claim that it is increasing taxes because of the ratio of tax revenue to gross domestic product is at 14%, and yet in countries it is 22%, is misleading. Instructively, GDP is the revenue a country generates in a year, and tax revenue, the total taxes a government collects in 1 year. That is a top story. You want to catch up with those insights on page 18. Now, with that story of GDP, let's shift gears and take a look at the county news this morning. We start with Kajiado County. Tension as election for trust land officials nears. That's a top story we'll take a look into on page 22. Now, 2 dead at the coast as Cyclone Lali causes havoc. Water and electricity supply disrupted in Mombasa and Kilifi. Strong winds caused damage to classrooms and business premises. That is a top story making the headlines on page 20. Briefly, in Kilifi County, chaos at nuclear project launch. The decision by the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency to initiate construction of a data collection station in Uyombo has raised tension in the area. Residents and activists opposed to the government's nuclear power project engaged in running battles with the police during a groundbreaking event at Uyombo Girls Secondary School on Tuesday. Now, in Nakuru County, donation to boost maternity service. The county is set to receive medical supplies and equipment worth more than 20 million shillings to boost neonatal care and maternal health services. Still in Nakuru County, families get goats in restock effort. Women-led homesteads in Laikipia North are major beneficiaries of a livestock restocking program targeting families that were hard hit by the 2022 drought. Now, let us move on and take a look at page 22 in Kajiado County. Tension as election for trust land officials nears. Just a day to the Kikonyike Community Trust Land Officials elections, tension is palpable with members talking of potential malpractices and chaos instigated by politicians. Now, in Kisii County, EACC urged to summon Ongwae in bursary probe. Senators order forensic audit, cash not carried to the next financial year. Let's take a look briefly to the mountain region, and we start with Kirinyaga County. 4 denied donkey meat possession charges. 4 people have been charged with being in possession of uninspected donkey meat. The prosecution told the Baricho court that the meat was not fit for consumption. They faced 2 more counts of killing the 30 donkeys with the intent of steal their meat and skins and killing them in a manner that caused them pain. In Mombasa County, farm demands land valued at 260 million shillings. A farm has accused the National Water Harvesting and Storage Authority, the Ministry of Lands and the Chief Land Registrar of declining to give it 2.3 acres, valued at 260 million shillings it claims to have leased from the government for 99 years. You want to catch up with that on page 22. For the real estate lovers, you have the DN2 property beefed up for you on the Standard this morning, and today it's all about special economic zones roar back to life. Arrival of new investors is a relief after years of limited activity brought about by lack of adequate funds to set up infrastructure such as roads, power, and water. That story is beefed up for you on the DN2 article. Let us shift gears and take a look at the international news. Arresting Hamas chiefs, Israeli PM at all order. ICC prosecutor wants them charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The US was happy when Putin was indicted, but blew hot when the court said it would probe American soldiers. That is a top story on page 31. In brief, European countries to recognize Palestine. Norway will recognize an independent Palestinian state in the hope that this helps to bring peace, with Israel Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre said on Wednesday. Now, let's take a look at business news. Ruto aids burst budget by 900 million shillings in 9 months. National Treasury had committed to reject cash requests beyond approved budget. Expenditures fly in the face of government's austerity measures. That is a top story making the headlines on page 32. In numbers, 11.2 billion shillings is the amount spent by State House and Office of the President against a budget of 10.4 billion shillings. 689 million shillings is the excess amount in Kenya, is the excess amount spent by State House in 9-month period. An additional allocation in Kenya shillings, that is 2.53 billion shillings, to State House in last year's supplementary budget. Now, in other news, KCB beats Equity with 16 billion shillings first quarter profits. KCB Group has posted a 69% growth in net profit to 16.06 billion shillings for the first quarter ended March, surpassing Equity Group for the first time in 4 years. That is a top story making the headlines on page 32. Now, let us take a look at sports news on the Daily Nation this morning. Now, we start with athletics. Fast rising common eyes Olympic slot. 25-year-old stands rich field. Now, microbiology graduate will represent Kenya at the African event next month. In matters golf bids farewell to Nakuru Pro Lorum. The Professional Golfers of Kenya chairman, John Wangai, said the late Nakuru resident professionals, James Lorum, contributed a lot to the sport in the country. Final tributes there on page 41. New KVF League format could steer Malkia strikers to VNL if well planned. Kenya Volleyball Federation, KVF National League, enters the business end this week as the end of season playoffs quarterfinals take center stage at Nyayo National Stadium and Moi International Sports Center, Kasarani. All right, let's move on and take a look at page 42. McKinstry, I have no regrets taking Gor Mahia job. New coach to handle Kogalo will not have worked in Kenya before, says club secretary Ochola. The newly appointed Gambia coach says he is only departing because of a better offer. You want to catch up with that story on page 42. Page 43 of the Daily Nation this morning. Firat explains choice of Malawi for Harambee Stars home ties. TAC warns Kenya needs good facilities for football to progress. Kenya coach says they have had a good memory of winning big, are familiar with the venue, and locals treated them well. All right, let's take a look at another story. Ronaldo to play in 6th European Championship. Portugal's 39-year-old forward Cristiano Ronaldo will play in his 6th European Championship, and veteran defender Pepe also made the cut as coach Roberto Martinez named his 26-man squad on Tuesday. And lastly, on the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning, proposal to stop school feeding bros protests. The government has not allocated funds to the program in the 2024-2025 financial year budget plan. Stakeholders express fears of early marriages and many dropping out of school. Now, sentiments by Silas Obuhatsa, and I quote, "It is dangerous to withdraw funding considering that food and clean drinking water are some of the things that attract children to school," end of quote. Now, with that story of feeding program being scrapped off the finance bill 2024-2025 brings us to an end of today's session of the Morning Momentum. Thank you so much for choosing to stay with Younib TV across this broadcast, and especially the Morning Momentum. By extension, gratitude goes to all those who made this broadcast a success. Behind the lens, Raphael Wangila, and the Chief Controller, Anifa Kavira. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then,